I am really happy to welcome Efi Pylarinou, Wall Street Pro, a former academic, fintech expert, a speaker, author, and a podcast guest. Welcome to the show, Efi.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be on this show. And as I realized today through a tweet on X, I pressed Grok, and because I was quoted or tagged in that tweet, the Grok spoke about me and said things about me. Efi Pylarinou is a fintech influencer,
Okay.
and he talks about these topics and so on. And most of it was very good. I'm quite impressed with that sort of introduction, if you want, from Grok.
I'll have to do the same and see what it comes up with for me, if anything. So,
Yeah.
well, that's good. You have a pretty broad background. I love your story. Could you just tell us a little bit about kind of how you got here, kind of where your career kind of took you on a couple of turns, maybe, and how you got
Yes.
here today? Just
Yes.
give us a little bit of
First of
background.
all, first of all, I'm joining you from the heart of Europe, Switzerland, out
Lovely.
of the EU, up close to the Swiss Alps. I'm
Beautiful.
based in Zurich. I've been here for 10 years, and pretty much for the decade that really defines what I think of as my fintech career, where I decided to dedicate myself to all the innovations in financial services. And I do confess that 10 years ago, it was easy to follow everything and everybody globally. And now it's such a challenge. I came to that decision because I started my career on Wall Street in New York in the 90s. I joined Salmon Brothers. For those that are much younger, that was one of the top, I would say, boutique investment
Hmm.
banks and Wall Street companies of the time. And I mentioned this because the culture was very cutthroat compared to any other
Really.
company. And those were my formative years, if you want. And life brought me to live and work in several countries because I married a diplomat, and I started reinventing myself and working remotely from the different posts where we were moving. I had the opportunities to move to Canada to teach at McGill um, during a very interesting time, the 2008 global financial crisis. I was teaching real estate finance when everything was, collapsing. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, were changing the
Right.
whole capital markets. Everything was impacted. So it's, if I look back, I've been in the hardcore traditional wholesale, if you want, financial
Hmm.
services and banking at the heart of the financial hub, if you want, New York. And now I'm finding myself in Switzerland, which, on the one hand, is a top country, number one for 18 years in innovation and broadly, um,
Hmm.
not necessarily in financial services, but we live in a time where everything is more
Yeah.
decentralized and everything is more global and everything is more connected. And that's how I kind of operate on a global network.
That's a great. That's exciting. So it's interesting that you mentioned that Salomon was a cutthroat environment, and those were your formative years. So I'm sure there were some scar tissue that got you informed, sort of where you are, and sort of formed your perspective. So I'm interested in hearing more about that as we talk through. But it's interesting you're in Zurich because I think in the United States, part of our business culture is sometimes we believe that this is the center of the global economy, and you're absolutely correct on many levels, not just in global finance, but in technology and culture. It is a very distributed. I think we forget, or we don't realize how much globalization has impacted the way. the way we work and live. So it's interesting that your fortunes with your husband is a diplomat and is giving you that exposure as well. So that's fascinating. Um, but there, you've seen a lot of changes. It seems like, not to introduce too much recency bias, but there seem like the changes are happening more and more, and they're more impactful. Technology, cultural, economic, political. It's now early 2025. There are some big changes happening. Seems like daily. But from some of the things I know you've written and spoken about, around fintech and Bitcoin and AI, and I think you recent blog post talked about X money, and DeepSeek was just announced last week. What are some of the things, like, how do you keep up? What are you focusing on, and what are the big changes that you're paying the most attention to these days?
Well, I must admit that, financial services over the past decade, um, the borders of what we think of financial services don't exist anymore, or rather, I would say they are reshaped and extended as we speak. They
Hmm.
used to be, within the confines of, digital, of physical branches and
Right.
physical banks. I mean, we moved to mobile banking. We are actually, I don't know if you realize, we are in the stage of everywhere banking. You can do banking on e-commerce sites, on travel sites, on educational sites, on all sorts of businesses, and we can give some examples. But sort of the boundaries are changing. So they're changing for many reasons. The enabler are these technologies,
Hmm.
right? And right now we are in the beginning of a new major tech cycle. We've gone through the cloud cycle and the mobile cycle. Some talk about it as the digital tech cycle, but I would say that cloud and mobile were major tech cycles. And now, although AI has been around for a very long time, and
Right.
especially in our industry, in financial services, it's been used for a very long time. It's not new. However, the advancements, the recent advancements, really are shifting everything and are opening up a new kind of possibility of moving to an intelligent era. So I have to, in order to make sense of what possible scenarios we're going to live in, because I can't predict the future and nobody can, but we can think through scenarios that are possible given what problems we have, what opportunities we have, what economics, because we're talking about, economically viable businesses, and the technologies that are enablers, and then look at scenarios. So I look at the technologies and then I try to understand what scenarios are possible.
Right.
So one scenario that in one area that I'm watching is this everywhere banking trend. So going beyond, it's not about whether it's at a physical branch or on your mobile. It's about whether you can be served for your financial needs where you're at. And that might be you want to buy a house. Why do you need to go to your banking mobile app
Right.
when, it's all about who's going to help you to make that decision and close that decision and serve that decision? And maybe you want to do it on a real estate app, right? Or if you're shopping on a retail site, the same. If you need some credit, if you need some insurance, if you need different payment choices, you have it there. So that's one big trend that I'm watching. um, And another big trend is these new businesses that are fintechs in disguise, if you want. So these are businesses that are not financials, but most of their revenues
Right.
are earned through offering financial services. And this is a new type of breed. These are sort of very tangible um, trends that you and whoever who's not focused in financial services could understand. And then there's other trends that are really about how regulation is changing, how geopolitics are changing that, whether we will uh, have a digital identity on a blockchain, for example, which is very core to moving to the future of the internet. We need that. The current way the internet is set up is not, it was not set up to be doing all these transactions that we are
Right.
doing, whether we are putting, our card details or repeatedly being authenticated. All these are issues that need to be solved. So they're linked because your digital identity is really the most precious asset that you have. And you would think that banks would be taking care of that. We're not there, but these are things that we're watching.
Right.
Then I'm watching what's going on with money. What is money? Traditionally, we all understand what money is, whether it's physical or whether it's that ledger in our banking app. We kind of understand. The economists say that for something to be money, it has to be a unit of account, a medium of exchange, and a store of value. But as we speak, Jim, the notion of money is being challenged. We're talking about private money being issued on the blockchain.
Right.
We're talking about central banks issuing and researching central bank digital currencies. Over 90% of central banks globally as we speak are looking into that. We are talking about the possibility of tokenizing on blockchains all sorts of assets, private assets, and making them potentially liquid, but surely easy, making it easy to verify them, to prove that you have them, to use them as collateral to unlock value. So these are like really disruptive ideas they see, but innovations happen slowly, scattered globally, and then something happens and
Right.
they scale, or they're put together like you put together a puzzle, and
Right.
suddenly looks like something versus isolated incidents. And then there's the big topic of AI, how it's going to change and is changing financial services, how quantum is not only a risk but also an opportunity
Hmm.
in financial services. And I'm also watching cybersecurity issues, which are a big, big headache and increasing globally.
Right.
And I'll stop there.
There's a lot on your mind, Effie. I don't know.
There is
I
a
don't know
lot
how
on
you
my
do it.
mind,
I don't
and
know how you sleep, but I would so a couple things that really stood out, and I guess even just kind of our prior conversations and following up with some of your work. You mentioned sort of everywhere banking. I think that one most people can relate to. I think I've heard that called maybe embedded finance, and I think different terms for it because we recognize everyone has a wallet and maybe has some cash in it or a credit card. So I think most people can relate to that. What 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 I find fascinating is sort of and is it is disruptive for sure, right? It is global as we talked about. This is extending now You know, there are some country over country differences. They can't be ignored. They're going to impact global markets. But if you are sort of the everyday, maybe a digital professional, someone who is grew up in that web era or even in that cloud era, I was thinking to myself, you know, at one point in the 90s, we put an E in front of everything. We called it e-business, right? And that was sort of new. And then we started to put an I
Yeah.
in front of things because it was, you know, like the iPhone.
Yeah.
And now the I is intelligent. Maybe
Yeah.
that's so. But as people who grow up in that sort of web, digital, even cloud era, who think they have it together, you're kind of opening up a whole new discipline, I think, that people need to pay attention to, because in legacy, or again traditional business or businesses, you know, they're going to be challenged. I know this is the innovator's dilemma we talk about all the time. There are going to be, you know, these fintech startups that are really challenging major global banks, right, and currencies, and they're getting, you know, and they have to pay attention to it. But it's just sort of for the, you know, the everyday digital professional, you know, why I think you maybe made the case, but why should they pay attention and start to learn about these movements in the financial services and fintech market?
Because quite frankly, they are going to impact the way we earn our living, the way we work, everything,
Yeah.
all our life. And therefore we are right now at an inflection point where everything is interconnected. We have these technologies that are advancing and at a very fast pace. We have socioeconomic trends like the future of work and the future of mobility and these types of trends, and they're all connected and creating very different possibilities in really every aspect of our life. And let's not forget that financial services are core to any economic activity,
Mm-hmm.
and that is never going to change. Doesn't matter if we use crypto or blockchains or whatever, that will remain core, and that is really the reason that um, like we say now, you know, AI is general purpose technology, it affects everything. Well, financial services affect every economic activity. And in that sense, they're behind everything. And that is really the reason that everyone should care. This is going to change every industry, society, as I said, how we work, how we earn our money, how we educate our values, how we are thinking of what are assets. It's just going to be
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
major change. And the other thing is that I think there's a tricky part here. We've had, you know, waves of disruption before, and maybe they're getting shorter. Yes, and this one with AI feels to accelerate faster, but nobody knows. We will see, you know, how the adoption goes. One thing uh, that is clear with this upcoming wave is that I think those that are um, of the camp of let me see what everybody else does, and then, you know,
Yeah.
when the dust has settled, I will catch up, right? And that worked before for some,
Right.
not for everybody, right? For some. I think this time it will not work, uh, because not only we're talking about fast pace, they won't be able to catch up when everything is said and done. And we can talk about why is that, and what can be done. But uh, I like to always bring up this Greek myth, the Icarus myth. I don't know if you
I am
know
familiar. Yeah,
about it,
flying.
where,
Yep.
right? So everybody that knows Icarus myth thinks that okay, you shouldn't fly too high because he flew and
Too
his
close to the sun. Yeah.
wax wings melted, right? Because he went
Yep.
too high, close to the sun, right? But what is not discussed so much is that myth also was talking about the danger of also
Mm.
flying too low, and that
Mm.
is not talked about so much. So there's a danger of flying too high, close to the sun, but also too low, close to the sea. And you'll never really take off and go anywhere. You're going to drown. So that there's
Yeah,
the
the
Greeks,
dark,
they're
but hey.
wise, right? You have to. So so let's think of that. It's true. It was true during the cloud and
Hmm.
mobile era, but now it's really pressing and very true. And yeah, I would say that there's two main things in terms of not flying low. Let's if you were to put an alert on your um, board
Yeah.
to yourself and say, it's danger here. We really need to move. And there's two things that need to be done absolutely now, yesterday. One is a change of mindset, and the second is get your data architecture in order, whether you're a small business, a medium business, or a large business. Getting your data architecture in order was also necessary for, the mobile era, but a lot of companies, patched it
Right.
with band-aids and, all sorts of temporary solutions. I don't think there's any more time for temporary and band-aids because the AI era is really absolutely. It's like you don't have something to feed that the engine of your car, whatever
Right.
the
Right.
analogy is, and you need to do that whether it's your proprietary data or not. It doesn't matter. You have to put your
Well,
data architecture
that's
in
good
order.
advice. I mean, I think I was going to you've I was going to ask you sort of what's preventing people. I mean, those are good advice. That's great advice. I think we've been talking about that for a while. Whether you're just taking a data first philosophy and you just have to have better a handle on your operation, right? You just have to have better business intelligence or analytics. Um, but I think the stakes are high with AI. The stakes are higher because we need to start leveraging that data, exposing and utilizing and monetizing that data with AI in a number of ways and enriching that with others. I think that's great advice. But I want to kind of touch on something, in your book, fast future blur. That's a lot. There's a lot on your minds
Mhm.
that you talk about, but you talk about, I think, thinking like an AI native, and that I think is really what you're getting at. This evolution of maybe you're a digital native or through cloud and mobile, thinking and acting like an AI native, and there are businesses and business models that are going to be built on AI, but as an established organization, being grounded in the financial systems that you're involved in your data, having the right mindset, those all sound great. But what's preventing individuals, or what's preventing companies from adopting that? Is it just they're just they're just hanging on to what they know well? Is it they don't have the competency or the the vision? I mean, what do you see as kind of holding companies back?
Well, there's many factors, but I would say the first is legacy debt, and that's both technical debt, and maybe the fintechs, the
Right.
grown-up fintechs don't
Not
have that.
yet.
There's the mindset. Not yet, right? But there's the mindset that even the grown-up fintechs, um, they don't necessarily. It's not clear that they have the mindset to really understand how to adopt AI towards becoming an AI native. And why do I make this distinction? Because just using AI as a tool here and there is not going to change your culture, much like 2 decades ago, if you were a traditional business and you started your digital transformation journey just using some digital tools, some
Mm-hmm.
analytics and so on, didn't necessarily make you digital natives. Digital natives, they really gave rise to the
Mm-hmm.
experience economy. They really provided feedback loops, data between customers and the business, and many other types of data that were not there before and were not harnessed or understood as core part of the business. Digital natives, they they use different KPIs to look at their business and run their business than the traditional ones. Right now, think of it: an AI native business, in a way, isn't born yet. We don't have new KPIs. We don't have a new business model that is really at its core an intelligent uh, business, and an intelligent, not only at the customer level, which is typically where most start their journey, but they should
Mm-hmm.
be at the enterprise and the ecosystem level. We're scratching the surface, but it's important to have the vision. We've seen that before. Those that led successful digital transformations in big businesses, and we do have examples in financial services. Take JP Morgan, for example. They had a vision and they strategically implemented that. And I think that it's in our book, and when we talk about thinking like an AI native, we have a framework to help leaders start that journey. But it's important to understand where and how and what we're talking about. And it's ever more important in this environment where there's increasing complexity and uncertainty. You need to start this
So
journey.
get started. Yeah. Well, this is you gave us like I know you have a lot on your mind. We, I love your framing of some of the challenges that are all actually enablers. So I love that idea. You mentioned quickly quantum computing, right? Is that a threat to crypto security or I'm sorry, cybersecurity? But also an opportunity, to scale machine learning, let's say. So but there's a lot to think about. I think there's a lot of literacy, I think is the word that I'm going to come up with. Like we need to take financial literacy, for the digital professional to a whole other level. In addition to really adopting and understanding, some of these emerging technologies. But if there's sort of one piece of advice that you would leave someone with today that where they can go out and start to make a difference in their work, what would you suggest?
Well, let me sell our book. Buy our
I didn't
book.
see that coming.
Um, I would say yes. Buy our book and many others. Uh, but beyond that, really, I would say that each of us should work systematically and strategically on self-educating and self-upscaling. And I would say that you can do that, in many ways. But today, one of the core ways to do it is to become part of some hub, whatever you want to call it, and learn from and with others. That is the core strategy. And think of it like your responsibility, your business has two main parts. One is business as usual, and the second is what do you want to call it? You want to call it business where the puck
Right.
is heading, whatever you want to call it. You want to call it innovation. You want to call it not becoming obsolete. It's like, think of the importance of doing things to maintain your physical and your mental health, right? They're both interconnected and interlinked, and somehow you have to find a way to take care of both of them, right? The same here. Find a way to systematically do the two things, the business as usual and where the puck is heading. Don't freeze because you're doing 90% of one and 10% of the other. Start from somewhere like an
Yeah.
atomic habit, but do it systematically. It's part of your daily work, and work as in not, because your employer said it. It's just part of work. You cannot stand still. You cannot fly low. You cannot ignore this. Whether you do it because you see that it can be valuable
Yeah.
or fun, or for practical, or for survival reasons, right? For all these combinations, I mean, the best attitude is to take it and do it, as in my opinion and my book, the way I like to think of it, it's a growth opportunity, and take it and do it with a fun
That's great.
attitude, but systematically and that
Intentionally and with
combination.
purpose. So don't fly too high, don't fly too low, but whatever you do, you have to fly.
You have to fly. You have to fly. You
Yeah.
can't ignore. You can't stand still. You can't stick to, this hasn't happened and this will take longer. It's not about trying to guesstimate the timeline. It's about just going with the flow of things. Nobody, it's not a question of what is the right pace, the wrong pace. It's like with everything, like with exercising, like with a good diet, like with something that you want to change. Start small, but do it
Great.
systematically.
That's great. Avi, so much great advice. Thanks for sharing your insights. You've earned them. You've earned these lessons over the years, and you've seen a lot. Thanks for sharing that with us. And I hope to talk to you again. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to What If, So What, a digital strategy podcast from Proficient with Jim Hertzfeld. We want to thank our Proficient colleagues J.D. Norman and Rick Bauer for our music. Subscribe to the podcast and don't miss a single episode. You can find this season along with show notes at proficient.com. Thanks for listening.